I was used to chaos, the kind that came with night missions, high-altitude drops, and silent infiltrations. But nothing prepared me for the chaos of a courtroom where the real battle wasn't about truth, it was about perception. The morning started like a routine inconvenience. A bogus citation for disorderly conduct after I had intervened in a tense situation at a gas station the night before. I de-escalated it, no punches thrown, no raised voices, just calm, trained control. But to the responding officer, I looked like the problem. Now I stood before a judge who hadn't even glanced at my file before unloading on me. "Miss Briggs, you seem to believe you're above the law," Judge Kellerman snapped from the bench, tapping his gavel with impatience. "Your attitude alone speaks volumes. You walk into this courtroom with zero respect for the process. It's written all over your face." I stayed silent. Not because I had nothing to say, but because I'd learned long ago that in rooms like this, restraint is more powerful than reaction. He didn't know who I was, not really. To him, I was just another defendant in worn jeans and a hoodie, standing alone without legal representation. He didn't see the years of special operations training. Didn't see the scars under my sleeve from missions classified beyond his clearance. Didn't know that 2 weeks ago, I was in Eastern Europe extracting a high-value target with the CIA. "Let me guess, you think your past excuses your behavior," he sneered. "Let me be very clear, I don't care who you think you are." I met his gaze, calm, unwavering. He leaned back. "You're lucky this is only a misdemeanor. But don't worry, I've seen enough people like you to know exactly how this goes." "People like me?" I smiled faintly. He had no idea. The courtroom buzzed with quiet murmurs as the judge moved on to other cases, leaving me seated until the recess. I waited, still and silent, like I had in sniper hideouts for hours at a time, patient, observant. It wasn't the first time someone underestimated me. It wouldn't be the last. A young bailiff approached with a clipboard. He looked unsure, glancing from me to the paper in his hands. Miss Briggs," he said, lowering his voice. "The judge asked for a copy of your service record." My eyebrow lifted slightly. I hadn't offered it. Who gave him that? He hesitated. "Someone from the district attorney's office requested background for all defendants this morning." Routine. Routine? Not likely. My records were sealed, buried under layers of clearance. Unless someone had pulled a string. I followed him down a quiet hallway and sat outside the judge's chambers, surrounded by outdated law books and the smell of cold coffee. 5 minutes passed. Then 10. When the door finally opened, Judge Kellerman didn't even look up as he motioned me in. He was standing at his desk, flipping through a file, my file. His brow furrowed deeper with each page. He finally looked up. But the condescension was gone. Replaced by confusion. No, disbelief. "Petty Officer First Class Briggs," he said, slower this time. "Navy SEAL. 15 combat deployments. Commendation for actions during Operation Kestrel." He glanced up again, as if trying to reconcile the woman standing before him with the record in his hands. "And what is this notation?" he said, squinting. "Joint Intelligence Tasking, Clearance Restricted, Assigned Overseas Operations, Civilian Integration Unit." I crossed my arms. "That's the polite way of saying I was where you'll never be cleared to know." His face tightened. "I wasn't informed of any of this," he said, almost to himself. "Why didn't you mention it earlier?" "Didn't seem like you were interested," I replied, evenly. "You already made up your mind." The silence was heavier than body armor. He finally set the file down. "I may have misjudged the situation." I smiled without humor. "You're not the first." Judge Kellerman took a long breath, as if trying to reset the power dynamic, but it was too late for that. He'd spent the first 10 minutes of our encounter trying to put me in my place. Now he was scrambling to find his own footing. I don't see why someone with your background would be involved in a minor incident like this, he said, sitting down. Especially someone with intelligence attachments. I leaned forward slightly. You think experience makes you immune from trouble? Sometimes trouble finds you. And sometimes, it wears a badge and assumes you'll stay silent. His jaw tensed. He wasn't used to being challenged, especially not in his courtroom. But I wasn't here to cower or play politics. You didn't read the officer's report closely, did you? I asked. He said nothing. If you had, you'd notice I was the third person to arrive. The man yelling at the gas station clerk was twice her size. The second person tried to intervene and got shoved. I stepped in, calmed it down, kept everyone safe. No strikes, no threats. Just, control. And yet you're the one charged, he murmured. Because I was the one the officer didn't expect to speak with authority. The judge flinched, just barely. He picked up a pen, rolled it between his fingers. The silence dragged again. Finally, he cleared his throat. Well, it appears this matter may have been improperly handled. Understatement of the year. He flipped through the report again, then signed the bottom of the page. Case dismissed. He didn't look at me when he said it. But I didn't move. Respectfully, Your Honor, I said, I'd like a formal record of the dismissal, and a statement clearing any suggestion of misconduct on my part. This won't be the last background check I go through. Now he looked at me. Really looked. And for the first time since I walked in, he saw something besides what he expected. You'll have it by end of day, he said quietly. I gave a sharp nod and turned toward the exit, walking past rows of silent observers. But just before I reached the door, the judge spoke again. Miss Briggs. I paused. He hesitated, then said, next time you walk into a courtroom. I hope it's from the other side of the bench. I didn't answer him. Not because I didn't have a response, but because I knew the weight of that statement. It wasn't flattery. It was recognition. Late, but real. Outside the courthouse, the sun was sharp and unbothered by what had just happened inside. A quiet breeze stirred the flag on the pole. I stood at the top of the steps and let the silence settle in my chest. A decade of service. Hundreds of hours in freezing darkness, waiting for green lights. Briefings in dim rooms with faces I'll never be allowed to name. None of it had prepared me for the feeling of being dismissed in front of strangers, as if my presence alone was offensive. But the mission was never about ego. It was about discipline. The kind of discipline it takes to stand still while someone dismantles your character without knowing a single thing about your life. I walked down the steps and passed the same patrol officer who wrote me up the night before. He averted his eyes. Good. Let him think. At the end of the block, my phone buzzed. Secure line, Charlie, 3, I answered without a word. A voice came through, low, clipped. One I hadn't heard in 3 months. Agent Briggs. We've got movement in the Baltic. Confirm chatter on the Zeta package. Your skill sets needed. 2 hours to pack. Copy, I said. Coordinates. Encrypted drop sent. Full cover reinstated. This one's off the books. The line went dead. Just like that, I was back in it. From courtroom shadows to global chessboards, where real power didn't come from robes or gavels, but from knowing what to say when you're the only one in the room who understands the whole game. I didn't need to prove anything to Judge Kellerman. But I'm glad he learned a lesson. Some of us carry our authority quietly. And when the wrong people underestimate us, it's only a matter of time before they find out just how deep the silence goes. 3 days later, I was 40,000 feet above the Atlantic in a blacked-out transport jet with no insignia and no flight manifest. The mission brief was locked inside a slim hard case chained to my wrist. Protocol called for a 3-agent team, but they were only sending me. That told me everything I needed to know. They didn't want it done loud. They wanted it done right. The voice on the comm crackled through my earpiece just after we crossed into classified airspace. Echo actual to Ghost 1, are you in position? I tapped the mic twice. Confirmation received. New directive just came in. You're being reassigned after extraction. Domestic priority. Intel suggests an internal breach in the judiciary. High-level leaks. Someone's flipping sealed ops logs. I didn't need to ask who. My encounter with Judge Kellerman was supposed to be small, insignificant. But someone had flagged the incident. Someone with enough access to pull redacted files that hadn't been touched in years. They were watching. And now, so was I. Back in the States, a judge had crossed a line he didn't even know existed, not by what he did, but by what he triggered. This wasn't over. Not by a long shot. If they were sniffing around black file operators like me, then someone on the inside wanted the whole machine exposed. Good. Let them come. But they better come prepared. Because next time I walk into a courtroom, it won't be to defend myself. It'll be to dismantle something much bigger. One gavel at a time. The coordinates led me to a safe house in Northern Virginia, quiet neighborhood, federal-grade shielding, and a two-car garage that concealed a tactical command center. I'd been here before, years ago, when the agency still referred to me as an observer asset. Now, I was the hammer they called when everything else failed. Inside, the lights were low. A single figure stood at the operations board, gray hair, tailored blazer, Deputy Director Elena Voss. She turned when I entered, no handshake, no welcome. Just, we've got a problem. And it's wearing a robe. I raised an eyebrow. Kellerman. Voss shook her head. He's small time. A symptom, not the source. But your incident triggered a surveillance alert. A judge in D.C. flagged your sealed profile an hour after you left the courthouse. We traced the access, to a private judicial database, tied to a shell account funded by a group we've been tracking for over a year. Who are they? I asked. Shadow Syndicate. Former intelligence, defense contractors, compromised clerks, all buried inside the judiciary. They call themselves the Chamber. Of course they did. They're not interested in justice, Voss continued. They're interested in erasing the agents who built it. She pointed to a digital wall of names. Every one of them was either dead, missing, or burned in quiet media leaks over the past 18 months. My photo was now at the center of the board. Your record surfacing wasn't an accident. It was bait, she said. To see if I'd bite? No. To see if you'd run. I crossed my arms. And now? She stepped closer. Now we fight back. You'll go under again. New identity. Full access. Your job is to embed inside the federal court system as a legal analyst. Quiet. Invisible. Find their leak. Track it to the core. And when I do? I asked. Her expression didn't change. You bring the whole chamber down. I nodded once. No further questions. I was already rewriting the past in my head. Names. Habits. Cover history. But deep down, one thing stayed the same. They started this in a courtroom. I was going to end it in one. 3 weeks later, I was walking the halls of a United States District Court under a new name, Erica Bell, civilian analyst assigned to the Federal Judicial Oversight Committee. My badge said, contractor. My resume said, former intelligence liaison. My credentials were just believable enough to let me blend in, but not important enough to draw attention. Exactly how I wanted it. The court was a fortress dressed like a library, polished floors, solemn architecture, metal detectors at every entrance. But the real weapons weren't in the bailiff's holsters. They sat in black robes behind thick doors, issuing decisions that could end lives or erase them entirely. And one of them was leaking names like mine to a ghost network called the Chamber. By week 2, I had patterns. Judges who moved cases quietly to certain clerks. Files that disappeared from internal archives before reaching appeals. And always, the digital signature, a single keystroke log marked B32/CH buried in the metadata. A calling card. That was their access point. But the signature wasn't automated. It was human. It only appeared during certain hours. It followed a pattern of time and access level. That meant someone, inside, was logging in manually. And I was getting closer. One night, just past 8 p.m., I stayed behind under the pretense of filing backlog reviews. The building was nearly empty. I moved through the staff server room using a maintenance keycard I'd cloned 2 days prior. Terminal 4B lit up as I powered it on. I typed the backdoor protocol I'd installed via encrypted flash. And just like that, I was inside the shadow system. There it was again, B32/CH last access, 7:42 p.m. location, Judge R. Holbrook's private chambers. I didn't blink. Judge Holbrook wasn't just senior, he was untouchable. Appointed during a classified Domestic Stabilization Act. Military ties. Corporate lobbyists behind him. And now he was the chamber's front door. I backed out of the system just as the hallway lights flickered. Footsteps. Deliberate. Heavy. Someone else was in the building. And they were heading toward the server room. The footsteps grew louder, deliberate, echoing across the marble floor just outside the server room. Whoever it was, they weren't lost. They weren't curious. They were coming for this room. I slid the chair back and powered off the terminal, pulling the flash drive with one motion. My hand went to the back of my waistband where I'd taped a slim tactical blade, plastic composite, undetectable by scans, silent in motion. The lights in the hallway flickered again. Then silence. The kind I knew too well, the kind that comes before violence. I stepped into the shadows by the door just as it cracked open. A figure entered, dressed in court staff uniform, but the build was wrong. Too rigid. Shoulders tight. Eyes scanning the room, not like an employee but like someone who had cleared buildings before. He didn't see me. Not until I moved. I stepped behind him, blade angled low. Hands where I can see them. Slowly. He froze. Then, a whisper. "You're late, Briggs." I blinked. Voice familiar. The figure raised his hands slowly, turned just enough for the overhead light to catch his jawline. Square. Scar above the left eye. Cameron Locke. Agency asset. Former field lead. Presumed Kia in Tunisia. I lowered the blade half an inch. "What the hell are you doing here?" I asked, voice low and clipped. "Same as you," he said. "Trying to stop the chamber before they finish their list." "You're on it." He chuckled once, dry and bitter. I wrote the list. I didn't have time to react before he pulled a small card from his pocket and handed it to me. Black laminate. One word burned into the surface: summons. "What is this?" "Invitation. You're going to be called into a closed-door ethics review, fake, of course. Holbrook runs it off-site. It's not a hearing. It's an interrogation. You don't walk out unless they like what you say." I narrowed my eyes. "And you?" "I've been inside. Got out because I made them believe I was broken. I've been off the grid since. But now they're speeding up. Too many witnesses are slipping through. And you've rattled them." I stared at the card. This wasn't surveillance anymore. This was war. And the battlefield was moving behind locked doors and phony hearings. "Where's the meeting?" I asked. Locke smiled grimly. Old courthouse. Abandoned wing. They call it, chamber room B. Of course they do. Then I'm going in, I said. Locke met my eyes. You'll need backup. I turned for the door. No. I'll need a gavel. The invitation said 10 p.m. sharp. No address, just a geoping on an encrypted channel that expired after I opened it. I memorized the location and wiped the burner. Old courthouse. South wing. Officially condemned. Unofficially, operational. I arrived early, dressed down, no gear, no blade, just the card and my instincts. They'd expect me unarmed. They'd expect me nervous. They'd be wrong on both counts. The entrance was buried behind a scaffold and a construction tarp flapping in the wind. A single security light flickered above the side door. When I approached, a scanner clicked red to green, and the door buzzed open. Someone was watching. I stepped inside. The air was thick with dust and something older, the scent of history that had been sealed off, forgotten on purpose. As I descended the marble steps into the abandoned corridor, the only sound was the slow tap of my boots on stone. Then, the voices. Muffled. Low. Ahead. I followed the sound until I reached a massive door at the end of the hall. Chamber Room B was barely visible on the plaque, half scraped off. I pushed the door open. Inside, the room looked like a courtroom, almost. High ceiling. Judge's bench. No jury box. The flags were gone. No emblem. Just 3 figures seated behind the bench in shadowed robes. And Holbrook, front and center. He looked up as I entered. Cold eyes. Graying at the temples. He gestured to the lone chair in the center of the room. I sat without a word. Erica Bell, he said slowly, voice like gravel. Or should I say? Briggs. No surprise. No hesitation. He was already deep into my file. We don't take kindly to operatives poking around where they don't belong. I met his gaze. Then stop leaking sealed identities. The figure to his left chuckled. Still got that fire. They said you were difficult to convert. I leaned back in the chair. They say a lot of things. Doesn't make them true. Holbrook folded his hands. You've interfered with our work. Pulled surveillance. Hacked judiciary access. That's not oversight, that's sabotage. You call it sabotage, I said, I call it disinfecting a broken system. Holbrook's smile faded. There are only 2 ways out of this room, Briggs. 1, you join us. I stayed silent. And 2? I asked. 2 is, permanent recusal. The door behind me clicked. Locked. I didn't flinch. Because what they didn't know, was that I'd already hacked the courthouse emergency system 2 hours earlier. Set it to trigger with a single voice command. I stood slowly. Funny thing about old courtrooms, I said. They echo. Holbrook narrowed his eyes. What are you? I looked up toward the ceiling vent. Then I said it. Echo protocol, activate. From above, the smoke alarms erupted. A siren screamed to life. And just like that, the shadows weren't safe anymore. The sirens shrieked through the chamber like a war cry. Strobes activated overhead, pulsing red. Smoke flooded through the ceiling vents, not from fire, but from the tactical canisters I'd planted earlier, masked inside the HVAC system. Non-lethal, disorienting, and laced with microscopic tracer dust. Let them run. I'd be able to track every one of them. Holbrook shot up from the bench, coughing. One of the robed figures reached under their seat, probably for a weapon. Too late. The emergency override ID programmed earlier unlocked the side door. And from it stepped Cameron Locke, wearing black tactical gear, suppressed sidearm in hand. Silent. Controlled. The same way he used to move through foreign compounds in the dead of night. He wasn't alone. 2 more agency operatives flanked him, sweeping the chamber with precision. No shouts. No wasted movement. Just one goal, extraction. On your knees, one of them barked. Holbrook lunged for the bench, maybe a hidden escape panel. Maybe something worse. I moved first. I vaulted the chair, drove my forearm into his chest, and pinned him to the cold floor. I told you, I said calmly into his ear. Some of us carry authority quietly. He struggled under my grip. You think this ends with me? No, I whispered. It ends with your network, and you just opened the door. Locke cuffed the other 2 judges as the tactical team swept the chamber for files, devices, hard drives. Everything that would burn the rest of the chamber's infrastructure. The entire raid lasted 4 minutes and 20 seconds. By the time backup arrived, the real kind, DHS and DOJ, we were already uploading the data dump. And Holbrook? He didn't say another word. They never do, once they realized the silence they used to weaponize had finally turned on them. 2 weeks later, location, classified. I stood in a briefing room overlooking the Capitol. My record was restored, sealed tighter than ever. But this time, it had an addendum: Internal Affairs Clearance, Level 5 Judicial Oversight. Activation, discretionary. Director Voss entered, handed me a folder. No words. Just a look. Inside. 3 names. 3 courthouses. 3 shadows left. The chamber wasn't dead yet. But they'd learned something important: next time I walk into a courtroom, it won't be alone.